In today's episode of Vice Versa, we're talking about Tesla FSD version 10 progress, a study showing decreased driver attention when using Autopilot, the revamped EV tax credit proposal in the US, and SpaceX's big launch last night. And unlike usual, Ricky is not here this week. He's traveling, so I'm being joined by Alex from ticker symbol U. How you doing, Alex?
I'm doing excellent. I was going to make a joke about me being Ricky, but having not been outside in a while, and that's why I look this way. But you know, I'm happy to be here.
You have the shaved head thing going down,
That's
which is
right.
It's the requirement to be on the show is you have to have a shaved head. So you
Yep.
pass that test. So you want to jump into the stories? You ready?
Sure, I would love to.
All right. So first off, we're talking about the Tesla full self-driving V10 that was released recently, and it's been getting a lot of, of course, there's 1,000 YouTube videos that pop up, and so many people are kind of sharing their experience from the beta program. And this is the one that Elon said was going to be mind-blowing. And what I find funny is the article I'm showing here is not mind-blowing, but it shows progress, and there's a different story that says the exact opposite, which is it is mind-blowing. So I just love how there's different takes on what we're seeing from the Autopilot upgrades. But the one thing that seems to be coming through all the videos that I've seen is that V10 does look like it's shown significant progress, but there is still a ways to go. And one of the people that I follow is Rob Maurer from Tesla Daily, and his initial video showed no interventions. The thing was flawless when he was using it. But since then, he's talked on his podcast about how he's never had a flawless sense. He's had issues here and there. And from his takeaway, it is clearly a ways to go before it's final. And this kind of comes back to one of the reasons I wanted to kind of talk about this on the show is it kind of comes back to the whole notion of Elon time versus real time. And he's kind of always kind of oversold the deadlines. He says that this is going to basically be fully featured this year. He said the same thing last year. Now we are seeing major progress, but everything I'm seeing shows that it's like way, way, way off. And I'm curious what your take is on the story.
Sure, yeah. So I think one of the things that's weird about artificial intelligence is that you don't really always see where the progress is being made, right? Like the results could look the same, but how they get there could be much quicker, much more efficient. They're much more confident in the results and so on. And so the end product might be sort of lost on the end user, but under the hood, a lot of things have changed, right? So I think this is an example why Elon might think this is mind-blowing is because, now the Autopilot is seeing lines with much more accuracy. It's much more confident in the decisions it does decide to make, and the way it arrives at those decisions could be much more fast, much more efficient, much smarter about how, all the data comes together to make that decision in the first place. But to the end user, it's like, it's just doing what it did last time. I don't see what the big deal is, right? And I think that's where the disconnect is. So in this case, I actually think there is two sides to that story, right?
Yeah.
The side Elon sees because he's working with Andrej Karpathy and the AI team very closely, and he's, peeking under the hood, so to speak. And then what we see as people who just push the update button and go, what changed?
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, it's I've worked with software development for a long time, and it was the same thing. It's like the engineering team could spend a month doing an entire rewrite of something, and it's a significant change behind the scenes, and it makes things so much more efficient. But then the users are like, it feels just like it did last time. Where's the big change? Yeah. But for this, it's like it's clear that there are improvements because there in these videos there are people that did Lombard Street in San Francisco showing it went all the way down Lombard without a single interaction, and the people even said it's never done this before. It's always screwed up one or two of those turns, and this is the first time. So it's like little itty bitty things that are working. But at the same time, it's like you got Gally from Hyperchange, and in his video, it does some what I took as frightening maneuvers going by the monorail drive that he was doing. Clearly, it's doing better, but it still has a ways to go. And so for me, it's just one of those there's that disconnect again between what Elon says and how the public interprets it. And it's not that Elon's trying to be deceptive. I just think there's a difference in how he communicates as an engineer and how people can interpret what he's saying and what the reality of the situation is. And I also think that there's people that think full self-driving is coming much sooner than it actually is. It's not even half baked yet. It still needs more time in the oven from everything I've been seeing.
Yeah, The interesting thing about artificial intelligence and software like this, it can be 99% of the way there for years, and 99% just isn't good enough, right? Like you need to be 99 point at least 6 nines, I believe, right, to pass the smell test for Congress, to pass the safety tests, to pass all the transportation board tests, to be able to claim all these things about safety and accident statistics and all that. So we have this car that's able to drive itself probably literally more than 95% of the time, which, let's be frank, is much better than most drivers can drive their car.
Yes.
And that's just not good enough, right? And
Yep.
Elon knows that, and Tesla knows that, and Tesla drivers know that. And I think where the real confidence comes from is no one else is really even 95% there. And it's clear that Tesla is making progress even above that 95%. And that's exciting when you can get in your car, push a button, and all of a sudden the car's learned something new. I was reading comments like, the car drives like a 13-year-old boy who, stole his parents' keys and is in the car, right? It's like, that's a pretty good driver. Last year it was driving like a 7-year-old boy, right? Like, and tomorrow maybe it's like a 16-year-old boy, and then like next year, all of a sudden it's like a 21-year-old driver who's been driving for 3 years or 4 years, and then this experienced truck driver, and then one day it's like, oh, it drives like the best race car driver on the planet, and it beats them in like automated timed laps, right? So I think we're actually, the jokes are getting funnier and funnier as they get closer and closer to like, wait a minute, I'm 20 whatever, right? It's like, so when you're comparing it to a 20-year-old driver, now you're comparing it directly to me. So
yeah, but that also brings up the whole robotaxi, because the whole sales pitch behind this is when full self-driving is available, they're going to flip on the robotaxi fleet and it's going to start making all this extra money for the company. What is your take from a business, like, you're all about investments. It's like, I'm curious what your take is on how this is looking and progressing from an investment point of view. Like, what's your take on it?
Yeah, so I think we're definitely still in the early proof of concept stage, right? Once you have a self-driving car, you're still, in my opinion, very far from having a robo-taxi. The taxi experience is much more than just getting from point A to point B. You don't need to automatically collect money. It needs to automatically think about its next passenger and plan its route and all that stuff. It's very different being able to drive a car and manage a taxi network, right?
Yeah.
For example, I'm certainly qualified to drive a car. I'm probably certainly not qualified to drive a taxi and do all these things I just don't even know about from the business perspective. Right. And then the second part of that is that once it's not going to be I don't think it'll be a flipped switch in the sense that, okay, he pushes a button and then all of these cars are now just businesses, right? They're self-contained taxis. There's a lot of business decisions that Tesla needs to make, like, what does it mean when a private owner owns one car versus a fleet owner who owns a fleet of Teslas specifically designed to make a profit as a robotaxi?
Right.
Is that really the same business model? Like, I leave my garage door open now, I flip a button and tell it, hey, here's when I don't use the car, so here's when you can go and make me money. I don't think that's a switch that gets flipped. I think that's a serious business unit that needs to get developed and tested and refined. And what happens if my car gets into an accident while it's out and about? I'm not in it. It's not, and then somebody else is in it, right? It's like there are all these challenges with, small scale, owning a fleet of one residential robo-taxis versus sort of what we have today, which is full-fledged, mature, ride-hailing networks, taxi networks, and so on. So that's my take.
Right. And that kind of actually leads us into the next story, which is about Tesla Autopilot. Now, there's a study it's an ongoing study that's been done. It used to be led by Lex Friedman, who used to lead the study at MIT. He's moved on, but the study is still going, and it's looking at autopilot drivers and how they use autopilot and the safety around it. And the most recent version of the study just came out, and it showed, as the title says right here, Tesla Autopilot results in decreased driver attention, a new study finds. And one of the comments was they specifically found that drivers would look more at the center screen. The model replicates the observed glance pattern across drivers. The model's components show that off-road glances were longer with autopilot active than without as their frequency characteristics changed. Driving-related off-road glances were less frequent with autopilot active than in manual driving, while non-driving related glances to the down center stack areas, the screen, were the most frequent and the longest at around 2 seconds per glance, which is kind of a long time to be looking away from the road when you're supposed to be paying attention. And the interesting thing here is, before I toss this to you for your take, is we've talked about this before the show just a little bit of there's the kind of juxtaposition of how the study shows when you have autopilot or self-driving features, people tend to get more relaxed. I mean, Waymo found the same exact thing through internal testing when they were starting their program, is that people get a little too confident in the system and tend to relax a little too much. What's your take on this?
Yeah, so I think there's really two sides to this story, right? You mentioned Gally from Hyperchange earlier, and I think this is another great example. He often talks about how driving is a stressful activity for him, right? So one of the things that autopilot and full self-driving let him do is just relax more. The car's just taking some of that responsibility off of his plate. And he's, I'm sure he, just like every other human being, is looking away from the road occasionally and so on. But really, that makes him able to take these longer road trips and know he's not going to be stressed out in the process, right? So I think the two sides to the story are, if you're the type of driver that really pays attention, you just became a safer driver because the car is handling some of the things for you and you're paying the same amount of attention, so that attention is spread over fewer tasks. The other side of that story is you can spend a little less attention and thus be a little less stressed because the car is taking some of that off your plate and you're still maintaining the level of safety you had before you had those features. And there's some balance and recalibration that needs to happen between those two states, right? Paying as much attention and too little attention to safely drive that we're all going to have to go through as these cars get smarter and take more responsibilities off our plates as drivers.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with the safety, because it's like, just because it might be more distracting and you're taking your eyes off the road for 2 seconds, there's a safety balance here. And it's like, so just because it's a little more distracted, does that necessarily mean it's less safe? And statistics are kind of showing, if you ask Tesla, according to their statistics, it is safer, which actually I did want to bring up just really quick, the NHTSA investigation, how they're looking into autopilot. They've actually requested self-driving data of pretty much all other manufacturers. They've asked for the same exact data from Toyota, Honda, Ford, you name it, from 12 different companies, because they want to do a full comparison, like an apples to apples comparison for safety records from every company to actually try to understand how much safer these features actually are, and if there's kind of a fallacy going on where we're kind of fooling ourselves so that it's safer. I'm really curious to see what they come out with in the end. I'm kind of in Tesla's camp a little bit on this, where I do believe their data shows that it is actually safer. And as somebody who uses the features, I can tell you I feel safer using it. I do fall into that camp where I might glance down at the screen a little longer than I should when I'm using autopilot. But long road trips are no longer exhausting to me because of that feature. That assist feature has made long trips very relaxing. I'm a little more, like, when I am looking at the road, I'm a little more focused. I don't have to worry about the car itself. I'm like looking around and seeing cars around me and being a little more aware of the situation. So it's like I'm finding myself less stressed. Like you were talking about Galley, it's like it removes that stress. And after a 6-hour drive, you feel pretty good. So it's like I imagine what they're going to find is that this is a safer system, not just for autopilot, but for all of these systems. I bet they're going to find something very consistent across all the manufacturers. It's going to be interesting to see what they come up with.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think there's actually a third case that I didn't think about until you just said that. There are people who are already pretty distracted drivers, right? For example, people who eat in their car, people who have children in their car and spend much longer time glancing in the rearview mirror while moving forward, for, like, to give you a very specific example, right? So what the car is doing in those cases is obviously making them much safer, right? Because they're not really elevating to that level of, hey, I'm consistently maintaining my perspective on the road and whatever. They're already distracted. They were doing that before these features. So now these features are just taking stuff off their plate. They're equally distracted because they have children in the back seat still. And what's happening is they just became much safer drivers because that gap between where they were and where they should be is starting to close with these features, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Precisely.
So yeah, I'm curious to see like how they map that on to like all these different scenarios, including that one.
Yeah, exactly. So next story, to jump over to a story that I'm going to try to not get on my soapbox for, but we're going to be talking about this new revamped EV tax credit here in the US. And the latest state of the proposal for this is, let me just get to the numbers. A lot of you who are watching probably are aware of some of these numbers, but the way the new EV tax credit here is going to work in the US is they're removing the cap for a limit per manufacturer, which means Tesla will once again be able to take advantage of this. So there's no more 200,000 vehicle limit. There's going to be a $7,500 incentive that will be available at point of sale, which means it's no longer a tax credit. You can get it off the vehicle right off the top. And that's for vehicles that have over a 40 kilowatt hour battery. If you're smaller than 40 kilowatt hours, it would be a $4,000 incentive, which I'll get to in a minute, which there's something about that that's kind of crazy. The other thing is there's an additional $4,500 if it's assembled at a union factory here in the US. Another $500 for EVs that have battery packs that contain more than 50% of their components made here in the US. And it's kind of like this potpourri where you could end up getting $4,000 off of a car, or you could end up getting like $12,000 or $13,000 off a car, all depending on where the car is built and who built it here in the US. And there's two factors here. We've talked about this before on the show, is the union angle of this is crazy. And what the reason I brought this story up is that it's Honda and Toyota are now basically crying foul because they don't have unions in their US factories, and that's going to hit them as well as Tesla. And so they're kind of saying this isn't fair for us. So there's the union angle. The other angle is the smaller battery packs. It basically makes that this incentive works for hybrid vehicles. And that to me is just bananas, because if you look at this list, here's all the vehicles that would technically qualify for this new credit, and here's what the credit would give you. You could get anywhere between $4,000, $7,500 off of a hybrid vehicle that are currently sold today, and many of these are really good selling vehicles already. They do not need an incentive. And hybrid vehicles' batteries sometimes cost as little as $1,000, and yet you're going to knock $4,000 off the price. It makes no sense. And I was a former hybrid owner. I used to drive a Fusion Energy hybrid, and most plug-in vehicle owners don't plug in their cars because you're talking about getting 20 miles of range when you plug it in. And then after that, it just turns into a regular hybrid. I was obsessive about plugging it in because I wanted to eke every battery electric mile out of that car I could. But I'm unusual for that. So the fact that they're going to be incentivizing cars that are already hot sellers today and don't need the incentive is just bananas. This, to me, my takeaway from this entire EV tax credit is it's a horrible, they're incentivizing all the wrong things. And I really hope that they reevaluate this. I've heard that they are. I've heard that there's some pushback from some senators and representatives that are kind of pushing back. I know there's somebody from Michigan, the home of Big Auto, is also starting to kind of push back on this, which surprised me because that's like the home of the United Autos Workers Association. So it kind of surprised me when I heard that. But what is your take on this? Do you have a take?
Yeah, so I as usual, I have multiple takes, right? I'm the guy who could talk forever. I want to separate out the two things, right? Because I think they're really important. The union thing, I agree, is probably not the right way to do this, because now you're incentivizing building the car company a certain way instead of building the car a certain way, right? So
Right.
I think it shouldn't be about who is building the car as much as what the car provides and what the car doesn't emit into the environment, and like sort of the incentives around the product being built, not the way or by whom it's being built, right? Obviously, you still want to neutralize your carbon footprint when making the product, but whether the worker is a union worker or not doesn't do that, in my opinion, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is incentivizing. I don't think it's bad to incentivize cars that are already popular. For example, if there was an incentive to buy a Model 3, right? If a Model 3 had some unique incentive, just because it was popular, I don't think that's a bad idea. What I will say is by incentivizing smaller batteries, what you're doing is you're sort of taking away from the cars that are fully electric and the cars that are leading the charge, no pun intended, when it comes to changing our environmental footprint, changing the types of cars that are driven on the road and all that. So I think the unfortunate truth is these incentives incentivize actually one step back, right? Because hybrids are now much more profitable because of that smaller battery pack than going full electric at the cost of that expensive undercarriage, that expensive skateboard battery pack. And that's a shame. I think these incentives should be about engineering and environmental progress, and so far they don't seem to be.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about. It's they're incentivizing how a company is structured, where they should be incentivizing what the end user, like what is the benefit to the consumer, not the
Yeah.
manufacturer itself.
And the environment, right?
Yeah. And the one thing I would kind of nitpick on what you just said about the small batteries, I'm not against them incentivizing small batteries because it's not the size of the battery. It's more about is it fully electric versus is it still using fossil fuels? Because there's companies like Arcimoto who are making the FUV, which is just a really cool, fun, quirky company making a really cool product. We actually talked to the CEO last week. That has a very small battery pack. It's like there should be incentives that apply to vehicles like that, but it's pure electric. It's not burning fossil fuels. So it's like I think there needs to be some kind of carve out that basically says hybrids do not apply. It does. You just can't do it with a hybrid.
Sure, that's a great point, and it definitely my point around the small battery was assuming a full-sized car, therefore a small battery equates it to a hybrid. But absolutely agree that the fact that it's fully electric is what matters.
Exactly. So on to the last story for the evening, and before we jump to that, we just got a super chat from Robert Clocko. So thank you so much. Have bad day with my super chat.
I love that super chat. That's my favorite super chat of all time.
You okay, Robert? So the next story we were going to talk about is something that was kind of fun that happened last night. It's kind of, in my opinion, a really big deal. SpaceX launched their Inspire 4 launch last night successfully with 4 civilians into space. And you might say, well, we've been talking about billionaires to space for the past couple months, it feels like. And you would absolutely be correct about that. The difference here is that these civilians were sent into deep space. They were, well, not deep space, but they were sent higher than the Hubble telescope and the International Space Station. They're basically right now orbiting the Earth at about 575 kilometers, which is way higher than Jeff Bezos went at 100 kilometers, way higher than what, Virgin Galactic did at about 80 kilometers. And those guys only went up for a few minutes and came back down. It was basically just a little arc. This is a full orbit. They're going to be up there for 3 days, and they're going around the Earth at about 15 orbits per day. This is kind of the blowing the door open for the future of space travel. And the fact that this shows, here's 4 people, just like you and me, regular schlubs that are being sent into space. Because I don't know about you, growing up, astronauts always were portrayed as better than the rest of us. They're like pure specimens. They are physically fit. They're mentally strong, and they're like, they have to be, the true grit to be able to do this kind of stuff. And this puts it more in reach, where it's looking more like, oh no, anybody can go to space. Here's one of the people. Her name is Haley. She was a childhood cancer survivor from St. Jude, and she now works at St. Jude, and she's in space, and she's got a rod in her leg. She is, a cancer survivor, and she's flying around in space right now. There's a data engineer. One of the other guys, he's a data engineer. His name's Christopher. He's up there. And I identify with him so much because it's like if just a regular schlub, sitting at a computer all day and now he's flying around in space. I so wish that could be me at some point. I don't know if it will be, but this has kind of been a lifelong dream of mine to go to space, and it feels more attainable than it's ever felt in my life. I just probably have to raise like $100 million to do it, but it still seems a lot more attainable now. What's your take on what SpaceX is doing and what this launch kind of represents?
Well, my first take is you're $5 closer thanks to that super chat, which is excellent,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I completely agree. I think, there's definitely a huge step in engineering prowess between SpaceX up here and the next 2, Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the ability to democratize access to space is a cause that we should all care about. I think the inevitable future of humanity is in the stars. My channel trailer has always been about space, our access to space, our interstellar journey as one shared collective humanity. And I think really SpaceX is leading that charge in a few ways, right? Like, it's one of the things that I just want to say is SpaceX reused a rocket to bring these people into space, right?
Yes.
It's a rocket that they're not on a new rocket, guys. They're on a used tin can that got used again to bring new people into space, which is incredible, right? That's something we talk about with cars a lot and planes a lot. and now we're finally talking about used spaceships, right? I think that's like a real market differentiator, right? Hey, you want to take a ride on my used spaceship? Like, who would have ever thought that's a sentence we get to say with any sort of seriousness in our lifetime? And here it is, 4 regular people in a used tin can traveling around the earth, for days at a time, right? Like, it's absolutely unbelievable. It's science fiction meets reality, right?
Yeah, they're really pushing the envelope. And I watched the live stream, and they actually they pointed out a couple times in the live stream when they were waiting for it to go off of the reason the bottom of the rocket's a different color than the top is because it's been used several times now. It's taken this flight up for GPS. It's taken this flight up for GPS. I love the fact they had to point out, like, it doesn't look pristine and the colors are different because that's actually a used portion of the rocket. And then they also pointed out that the Dragon capsule they were in was also reused because it took astronauts to the space station a while back. So there was so much of this rocket that was being repurposed and reused. This is, to me, it's like, the space shuttle was sold as this, a reusable rocket. It's going to go up and down. But yet it never was cost effective. It was crazy expensive to run. I grew up watching that thing take off all the time. This is completely different. This is private companies finding the cheapest, most effective ways to get people into space and get those costs down. So not only is it cheaper to get satellites into space or to colonize Mars, but to do space tourism. I mean, you mentioned that SpaceX is ahead because they absolutely are ahead. But I kind of look at it as they're all in separate timelines. So like Blue Origin may be behind, but they're gonna, I don't know if they'll catch up, but they're in a separate timeline. They're slightly behind, but at some point, Blue Origin's gonna be doing things just like this. So it's the more companies that we can allow to kind of like flourish, I think this is going to become more and more competitive. The prices will continue to come down. And maybe by the time I'm 70, I'll be able to go to space.
I think it's a real reality.
Yeah.
We're definitely laughing, but I think you and me, if we want it bad enough for real as regular people, will be able to make a video from space. No kidding. Guys, I'm in space. I'm logging into YouTube 3.0 or whatever from space. No joke.
Yeah. The other side of it is, to me, it's like I've always thought it's funny, like how there's still flat earthers. It's like, how are you going to write off that the Earth is round when you can actually just get into a rocket yourself and go to space and see? Yeah, see, it's not flat. It's a round sphere that we're going around.
The bottom of my video is completely flat, so check me.
I love that. So I'm curious, like, let's jump over to the comments. That was kind of the last story for this episode. And so I thought we could kind of just start kind of cherry picking some comments. If you guys have thoughts or feedback on any of the stories or any other stories that you thought were worth talking about this week, sound off in the comments. I saw there were some not controversy, but comments earlier from Bong Hollywood about how full self-driving and autopilot is more of a driver assist, not a driver replacement feature, which I actually agree with that point of view, that that's what it is today. It's going to be a while before full self-driving ever becomes a driver replacement. It's going to be, we're a ways off from that, my take.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about that is, like, let's spend a little time talking about self-driving, if you don't mind. I think Elon did a really good job pitching that too, right? Hey, you're buying into something very early for much cheaper than it's going to be in the future. When this thing drives itself, it's obviously going to be a big step function in value for the car. So if you don't want to wait till it's full self-driving, you can buy in early and have lifetime access. And if you do wait, just realize you're going to pay for a self-driving car what a self-driving car is worth, which is substantially more money, right? Because you're taking all of the human driver out of it, which is a bulk of the cost of A to B transport, right? So,
right. There's Jonathan Root commented about unions when we were talking about unions. I'm in a union. Unions are not useless. I make significantly more than my non-union counterparts with better benefits. They were responding to somebody else's comment about unions being worthless, but okay. I do want to kind of agree that unions do have their place. I'm definitely not anti-union, but I am definitely anti the way that this is incentivized. This program's incentivized, is that it's incentivizing the wrong thing. The goal is to get us off of fossil fuels. And in that, it should be focused on doing that, trying to get alternative forms of powering our cars to other platforms, whether that's hydrogen or battery electric. I know that's going to be kind of incendiary for some people, but I don't have a horse in the race for what the ultimate choice is. but we should be incentivizing getting off of fossil fuels. And the current EV incentive does not do that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the only thing I'll say to that is whatever choice or choices we make, the only consideration I'll say is we need infrastructure to support it. So
Yeah.
one of the nice things about electric is the infrastructure is kind of already there, right? It's
Yes.
we can talk about fast charging, but it's like I can plug a car in my garage and it will trickle charge, right? So electricity is sort of this no-brainer, A, because we can see that it clearly works, but B, it's ubiquitous, unlike, for example, hydrogen, in my opinion, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, my take on hydrogen for passenger cars is it's not going to happen for passenger cars. That ship has sailed. But I think fuel cells and hydrogen has a place, just not in passenger cars. It's like
That's fair. That's a great point.
For trains, buses, planes, there's so many
Yeah.
other, just energy storage. Like if you're
Freight, yep.
yeah, if freight, like all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of places where it makes a lot of sense. But passenger cars, it's like everybody has access to some kind of outlet somewhere. It's really easy to kind of charge up an
I charged my
Arcimoto.
car to Starbucks the other day. Like,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So the infrastructure is a lot easier than what's going to be required for hydrogen. And not to tease videos that are coming up on my channel, but a lot of people have asked me to look into a company called Plasma Kinetics, which is basically doing solid hydrogen. And I'm working on a video about that right now. This is one of those things of I always hate saying something's been debunked or it can never happen. It's like, based on your current understanding, it can never happen. But what if some innovative company comes up with a solution that fits a need where suddenly you've got these hydrogen cartridges that won't explode because it's stored in a solid form on films. And suddenly you've got these cartridges of safe hydrogen and it's cheaper than storing it in a canister. And suddenly hydrogen's way cheap. And you can just go to a convenience store and buy a replacement cartridge and plug it into your car and go. It's like suddenly you can start to see where there is potential for other alternative energy sources for our vehicles. So it's like, I never say never when it comes to hydrogen or other forms. It's just, you don't know what you don't know.
That's exciting. Yeah, I'm super pumped to see that video.
So let's look through the comments a little bit. And Alex, if you see any comments or anything that you want to call out, feel free. Dusty Green said the launch of SpaceX was better than any sports game. For him, I was cheering and yelling. I used to like sports, but I don't give a anymore. So I agree with Dusty. It's like I was watching. I actually got a little teary last night. I was watching it. I got a little choked up. It was.
I'm getting choked up right now.
Yeah,
you know?
it was one of it lived up to the name of Inspiration 4 for me. I got very inspired last night watching it.
SpaceX rocket. A lot of good comments about how often the SpaceX rocket has been reused at, the various stages and parts of the rocket. You can imagine in the far, far future, especially in sci-fi TV shows, right? You see all these junky, used up, reused spaceships, right? If you've ever seen shows like The Expanse or Star Trek or Star Wars or anything, people are driving junky spaceships. And I think that's where, we're really seeing the start of that today. Rockets used to be pristine by definition. And now, hey, here's the wear and tear. Here's what this mission's from. Here's this scar from this mission. I think that is an important part of the story. And when they do finally retire this rocket, they decide, hey, this belongs in a museum and we can just say it's been on 200 gajillion missions. Here's the whole timeline. Like, look at this compared to its next peer. I think that'll really kick off a lot of companies, like you were saying, on different timelines and focusing on different parts of the spaceships and different modules. But what's actually going to happen is that industry will start coming together. You'll see space mining rigs for asteroids. You'll see shuttles taking us to and from the moon on a regular interval. You'll see, cruises to Mars and Venus or something. I'm being a little hyperbolic in that last one, but not too much, right? Like, because one day we will be a spacefaring species, and it starts with things like being able to take more than one trip with the same rocket, right? So I'm really, really, I know we're only half joking about the inspiration, but when I think about this is the second time that people have been on space in the same rocket exactly, you know what I mean? That's the start. It's really the beginning.
we're heading towards the Millennium Falcon beat up looking future.
You're not kidding. We
Going to
really are.
space.
We really are. Like, and that I think is worthy of the title of inspiration for,
Yeah. It's going to look more like Star Wars or The Expanse versus Star Trek, which is always pristine and clean and beautiful. It's not going to be that.
And that's the truth, right? Is like we like to beat stuff up. We like to drive things hard and fast, right? And like, being able to reuse it and know that it can kind of take the heat is part of, I think, the exciting parts about space, right? The real parts about space.
Yeah. Don't know if you have a take on this. Ben Rabstar said there should not be an incentive, talking about EV tax credits, there should be a pollution tax. I haven't thought too much about like there's carbon taxes and things like that. Do you have any thoughts or take on pollution taxes or carbon taxes?
I think if you're going to have like reverse incentives, like, hey, punitive, sort of fines, I think what the problem with those is you have to roll them out very slowly because you need to let existing companies adapt, right? Mm-hmm. And it tends to be like, if you're a company that's already behind, things like that make you further behind. I strongly believe that, pollution taxes are, making the poor poorer and the rich richer because, only certain levels of companies can really afford to neutralize their carbon footprint while keeping operations high, like spending money to do that. So I'm much more in favor of positive incentives to do current things faster than negative punishments to stop doing certain things slower over time, or else it's not that fair.
Right.
Does that make sense? I know that's kind of
it sounds like
it's an important distinction, but like maybe a tiny one.
You're more carrot than stick.
That's right. I'm much more carrot than stick because the underperformers already tend to not need the stick. They need more of the carrot, and you're basically just punishing the people with a stick instead of giving them the carrot, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is a weird analogy, but I worked in the video game industry for a long time, and one of the mantras in game design was don't penalize your player. It's like you want to incentivize them to do things. You don't want to like set them back. So like, the death penalty in games from 30 years ago, you die and you go all the way back to the beginning of the level. The game theory has kind of changed where you don't do that because it makes an unpleasant experience. And you can kind of make an analogy to investment as well. It's like carrot versus stick tends to work a little bit better because you're incentivizing people to make different choices versus then taxing them into obliteration because they're not doing something you don't want.
I do see a comment that's related to that says tax the heck out of single-use plastic. I kind of agree with that on like a consumer level, right? Bring your own. Here's the opposite of that. Let me give you why I think a tax is still a bad idea and you should do an incentive. What if instead of taxing people for single-use plastic, you got $1 off your coffee if you brought your own cup and it was like a reusable cup, at Starbucks, and now you're filling a cup instead of filling a landfill, right?
Exactly.
And you're using that cup over and over again. I think that would go a long way. If, imagine you got $1 off your groceries for bringing a reusable bag instead of being asked for paper or plastic, right? It's like, oh, just fill this bag that I've been using 1,000 times. I think that would go a really far way. I think a lot of people would be willing to always get a couple bucks off here and there for literally everything like that, and that would add up really fast and reduce people's carbon footprint substantially.
Yeah, I agree. That's the whole carrot mentality there. And Dusty Green says, I often use a mix of carrot and stick when managing people, but lean very carrot. It's like, you do have to pull out that stick every once in a while, but let's keep that to a minimum.
And the thing you should always be careful there, carrot in public, stick in private.
That's
just
great.
saying. That's good management, right?
Yeah. Oh, did you see Mystic Wolf's comment towards you? Side note, ticker symbol U, I bought some TNT this morning.
Oh man, that's dynamite, man. I'm excited. So for people that don't know, that's a stock I covered recently on my channel. My channel's about investing in innovative, disruptive technology companies that are publicly traded. And my most recent video is on a company whose ticker symbol is literally TNT. So there was a lot of explosions in the video.
Yeah, it's a great video, by the way. If you haven't checked it out, go watch it. There's some really good humor in it, too. Yeah, Eric Berndorf says, I won't invest in Coke or Pepsi because of what they're doing to the environment. And I think this kind of ties into like your channel, Hyperchange and other investment channels where it's put your money where your heart is and your beliefs are.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's invest in businesses that are doing right by what you believe they should be doing. So
I think that's so important. Yeah, too. I'm gonna stand on my soapbox for 15 seconds if you let me. I think the best thing you can do as an investor, as a person, as a creator, is really kind of stick to your principles. You're much more comfortable holding something or doing something, grinding through a hobby when it's tough, when you really believe in that long-term vision. And if your vision involves a cleaner earth, whether you're watching, all the great channels that we're talking about here or our channels or whatever, the thing we all have in common is we really believe in that, right? We believe in a better tomorrow, a more reusable tomorrow, a more fair tomorrow. And, we're tackling that technology by technology. And I think that's really important to recognize. If you don't believe in the technology, that's not a problem. Like, you have every right as a free market participant and as a participant in society to decide, hey, that's not a future I believe in. I'm going to put my money elsewhere. As long as you're consistent about your worldview, I think that's what really matters. So, not that you believe I'm right or Matt's right or Ricky's right, but we're here to deliver information for you to make meaningful decisions about your lives and the lives of people around you, right? So.
yeah, you got to make your own call. Yeah. And it goes beyond investment. It also goes into being a consumer. It's like
Absolutely.
Shop at places that you agree with. Don't shop at places you don't agree with. Buy products from companies that you believe are doing the right thing. I'm trying to. I struggle with that every single day. But it's like I'm trying to walk the walk of the things I believe in. I've talked about it numerous times on the channel, but I'm starting the process of building my own home, and the home I'm building is going to be an incredibly energy efficient home. It's going to be net zero. It's like I'm doing all the things that I talk about on my channel, like all the topics of like geothermal systems and solar panel roofs and all that kind of stuff. It's like I'm going kind of nuts. I've been trying to keep it in check, but I'm also trying to kind of walk the walk and do what I believe in.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And you know what? At the end of the day, when you have that coherence in your life where like the things come together the way you want them to, not the way other people are telling you to, I think that's what it means to live a fulfilling life is, hey, I'm realizing my beliefs through the things I do, say, buy, participate in, right? Like, and just because we don't align all the time on what that is, that doesn't make one of us wrong. That's being human, right? So that's super exciting.
Going back to that carbon tax, Daniel's raising without a carbon tax, lowering greenhouse gases is too slow. I don't disagree with the fact it's too slow, but I would kind of say there are probably creative ways that you can dangle a carrot to get similar results without having to pull out the stick. I think I'm kind of in the same camp with Alex on we can find creative ways where it's not going to screw over the poor getting poorer or the rich getting richer. We can find more creative solutions to try to incentivize people to do the right thing. There's some.
I think I saw the same comment.
Yeah, you probably did. Yeah.
I think a lot of people are really excited to hear more about your house. Do you want to spend a minute or two talking about some of like the projects within that you're most excited about and some of the technologies you're most excited about incorporating? Like, can you walk us through some of the decisions you had to make to do that?
Sure. Well, the thing I'm most excited about is the company I'm working with. It's a modular home company. So my house is going to be partially factory built. It's a panelized home, so it's not like it's coming on a shipping container and it's done. But all the walls and the windows and the doors are all getting pre-installed in a factory, and the walls get shipped and then they get put up. So the house is going to be built in a matter of days. So in the factory, it's going to take months to build everything out, and then when it's delivered to site, it's just like boom, boom, boom. 4 or 5 days later,
awesome.
There'll be a house there. It's going to be really, really cool and crazy energy efficient. Like I think it's R45. I don't know if you know what our values are for homes, but it's like 3 times more energy efficient than a typical home for the walls, ceilings. I'm still on the fence about like if I'm going to do. There's like little cartridge style HVAC systems, like a Mitsubishi, like little mini split system that you can do that's super energy efficient for heating and cooling, or a geothermal system. I'm looking at one or the other right now. I'm hemming and hawing about which way I'm going to go, but it's going to be living in this house. The thing I'm most excited about is it's going to be crazy cheap to heat and cool this house. And I don't know about you, but I spend way too much money every winter keeping this house warm and keeping it cold in the heat of summer. Where I
I
live.
live in Florida, so I only have one
Yeah.
of those problems.
You only have
But
the hot problem.
yeah, yeah. But so like geothermal, I'm curious. Like, would you be able to put like a geothermal hot tub there? Like, what does that let you do?
could.
Fancy things like, hey, a hot tub is hard to heat, right? You're heating water for long stretches of time. You're trying to get it hot quickly. There's all these inefficiencies with a hot tub by virtue of it being like a hot pot of liquid, right?
You
Does
absolutely could.
So yeah, does that really buy you like a much more efficient hot tub or like much more efficient heated floors, like all of the luxuries that we associate with the wealthy because they're so financially inefficient? Like walk us through some of those types of things. Are you doing anything like that?
It is kind of that. It's like the geothermal system. It's you can tie it into other systems. Like one of the things I want to, if we get that, I want to tie it in. It'll be tied into my hot water system. So much like the hot tub, it's like the waste heat that's not used from the compressor and the rest of the system will be fed to heat the water that's stored in a tank, and it won't be hot enough for like hot water. But imagine instead of using cold water that you're trying to heat up for hot water, it's heating up water that's already maybe 100 degrees.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to use
that's
that
awesome.
much. Doesn't have to use that much energy to get it to the 126 or whatever temperature you want to get it to. So it makes not just your house more consistent temperature wise across the board, where houses that have furnaces that kick on and off. It's like you'll have this 20 minutes where you get the cold air blowing through the house, and then it starts to get a little stagnant, and then suddenly the system kicks back on again and it does it again.
Yeah.
Geothermal, you can't avoid that. It's more just consistent all the time, night and day, across the year, and then you get benefits of you use less energy to heat your water, or some people use it to heat their pool. They'll have a pool and they'll use
Yeah.
the waste heat to help heat their pool or a hot tub. So yeah, you can use the system in any number of ways. Move that heat
That's
to where you need
exciting.
it. It's really neat.
This is probably a silly question. I don't know anything about geothermal. Do you have to be in certain locations to leverage geothermal, or is that something that anyone in the USA can have if they want it?
Anybody can. The difficulty is cost and the return on investment. It's kind of like solar. It's like you can't say to somebody, just go solar. Everybody can go solar. It's like, well,
That's
how
right.
much are you paying for electricity right now? How much are you paying for that? So the return on investment may not be there depending on where you live. But like here in the Northeast, we have oil is still used a lot in New England and New York State. And if you compare that to geothermal, it's dramatically cheaper, and the system will pay itself back in short order. But if you're talking about comparing it to like natural gas heat, it gets a little more nip and tuck because natural gas is so cheap that
Sure.
the cost efficiency might not be there. But it depends where you live. But it can technically work anywhere.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool.
A lot of good discussion about geothermal now. That's exciting.
Yeah. Comments about Boxable. Boxable is an interesting modular home company that was rumored that Elon was living in a Boxable home in Texas, and he was. Just to confirm that. Very interesting company.
Was there like a reason for that? He just wanted to showcase that company, or like he just likes the idea, or like I missed the Elon Boxable story, right? I'm all about the Dogecoin story. That's my low-key guilty pleasure. So like, okay, Elon lived in a Boxable home. Now what, right? Does he advocate for modular homes? Did Boxable is Boxable and Tesla doing something cool? Like what's going on there?
I don't know if they're doing something officially together, but it's one of those, he needed a home quickly. He wanted a home close to where he was working for SpaceX. And here comes Boxable saying that literally like, we can give you a home like that. And you can just have a home and you just put it wherever you want. And it literally unfolds and suddenly you got a little house. I think it was convenience, cost, and just how quickly it was that they could put it up for him. I don't know if he's like championing it, but I've also heard that in Austin, because of the influx of all the tech companies and SpaceX itself, there's a huge housing shortage. And so Tesla's having a hard time recruiting people to come work in Austin and to come work in SpaceX because there's no place to live. And so they're talking to companies like Boxable because you could just whip up houses for all your employees in very, very short order.
I wonder if that'll lead to like very interesting community designs where it's like, okay, we put down a really long pad and houses on top of that pad, concrete pad. I don't know what the material would be made out of, and then we pipe heat through the pad, and everyone has, you know what I mean. We're
Yeah.
heating a ton of homes in some efficient way we can only do because we planned it out, by putting these foldable homes on top in a certain way. Like, oh, we can filter water through this pad, and now hundreds of homes are getting water through this shared system. Like there's a lot of interesting community level design choices you can probably make when homes are very easy to stand up and the floor can be tied to like anything, so to speak, right? Because it's modular.
Amen. Yeah.
So
That
would be really interesting.
That'd be awesome. I know there are companies, not companies, cities in like Europe. I'm blanking on where it was that I read about it, that they're using waste heat from, I think it's like a data center that's nearby to actually heat homes that are in the area because they're pumping
That's
that
cool.
heat all around. So it's kind of like it's trippy, but you have to plan for it. You have to be able to build the infrastructure that can move that heat around. So like what you're talking about is 100% possible if you just plan ahead.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people talking about like they're net zero minus water cycling.
One of the things that I've always been interested in is just speaking about boxable and modularity and design, right?
Yeah.
So the Cybertruck has an air-conditioned bed, right? Or it will. So one of the things I've been thinking about for a while now is, okay, you take off that sliding door on the Cybertruck bed, you slide on a modular home where like, now the floor of your tiny home is the truck bed, and maybe some things have to fold out and fold into work. But now you have a Cybertruck that's carrying like either a trailer or a house and providing the conditioning and the battery for like a home or like a trailer sized home or like a pitch tent typed house that's like a little bigger than a truck bed or whatever, but it's attached to a Cybertruck. What do you think about that? Like, a literal maybe 100 square foot, little better than a tent, maybe not quite the size or the luxury of a modular home, but like something in between, but with the ability to be attached to a Cybertruck or a truck bed or whatever. What do you think about something like that?
That would be awesome. That would be really cool and an efficient use. I mean, it's like think about the Ford F-150, how they've bragged how that thing can run your home for like 2 days off the battery pack that's in the bottom of this Ford F-150. It's like, well, here you go. You can take your home wherever you want to go, plant your roots, and then you can use your truck not only to move, but to also help power the house.
Yeah. And I think, I believe the Cybertruck also has things like an air compressor, right? So it's like all of a sudden you have these real utilities attached to this utility vehicle that can power little appliances in your home, right? So it's like all of a sudden, maybe minus running water, but like you're really getting closer and closer to like, having this vision of living out of your car in a more successful way, right? With going to a natural park or whatever you want to do, a national park, excuse me, and living in luxury because you're living in a Cybertruck, right?
Yeah. And a couple of people have, like Bong Hollywood just pointed out, I'm using the term geothermal, and that's a common understanding of what it is. It's a ground source heat loop. It's what it is, technically. But yeah, it's called geothermal, but geothermal is typically like, you're talking about like Iceland is using true geothermal. They're using the volcanic activity that's very close to the surface to generate huge amounts of power for cities in Iceland. Geothermal has been commonly used. I don't know if that's the right thing for us to use, the way to use it, but it's just common. And he also pointed out that you typically don't see geothermal in cities. There's no space. It's like you need space to basically put your loop into the ground. So you have to drill straight down, or you have to do ground loops out into a lot of space. So typically you need room to put these systems in. And so if you're talking about a densely packed city, you're going to have a hard time getting it in there. Let's see. I think that's about it for today. We should probably wrap up. Any closing thoughts that you had?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Tesla, probably the Tesla FSD Beta 10, probably much more exciting than we're giving it credit for, while being a little less exciting than Elon's giving it credit for.
Yeah.
Space, a lot closer than we think. I think everyone watching today has a serious shot of being up in space if they want it bad enough within their lifetime. Really excited to see what the transportation study reveals about all of the data for self-driving and driver assistance packages, and I'm curious to see what ends up happening with the incentives for EVs and hybrids as well, including the structures of how these companies are built now with the union versus non-union argument. So lots of exciting news in the technology space, the innovation space, and of course the renewable energy space as well. I thought this was a really cool episode, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on. As usual, you're one of our favorite guests to have on. And why don't you tell everybody where they can find you online?
Oh, sure. So my name is Alex. I run a channel called Ticker Symbol U. It's a channel that invests in the investor by doing technology education focused on disruptive technologies that are featured in some of the best publicly traded companies on the market, like Tesla, like Palantir, like Amazon, all of these companies that are using advanced technology to drive the world forward. So come check it out if you're interested in technology and investing in the future.
Great. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss an episode. We're live every Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, and Ricky should be here next week. And you can always listen to the podcast version on the show at viceversa.show. As always, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.